Okay, this is podcast number 2 for chapter 9 on the nervous system. In this podcast, we're going to go over the structure of a neuron and the different ways that neurons are classified. So this cell right here is a neuron. It's got a very unique structure to it. No other cells in our body quite look like this. With the cell body, they've got all these projections coming off of the neuron. And the job of the neuron is to send electrical impulses. So this is what a neuron would really look like under a microscope. And again, you have this large cell body and then lots of extra little processes coming off. So we're going to take a look at what all of these different parts are for. So neurons are also called nerve cells. And they have a very unique structure to them, as I was just saying. They have a cell body. Inside that cell body is the nucleus, so that's where the DNA is, and that's where everything is controlled. And then you have lots of extensions or processes coming off of them. These are called nerve fibers, and they are going to be what will do the conducting of the impulses. And the impulses is how information is sent around the nervous system. So there's two main types of processes. There are dendrites. Dendrites are shorter processes that are more numerous. These are going to come right off of the cell body, and they form the receptive surfaces of the neuron. So that means that they are going to be receiving the impulses that would come into the neuron. So this is where all of the information is going to come in. The second type of process is the axon. Axons, you only have one. It is a much longer fiber that is coming off of the cell body, and it's going to move the impulses away from the cell body. And at the end of your axons, you've got lots of small little branches called axon terminals. And those axon terminals are what are going to send the impulse to the next cell. So the impulse comes in through the dendrite, goes down through the cell body, and then out the axon to the next cell. So in the next podcast, we'll take a look at how that signal actually gets transmitted. Okay, so this is what a typical drawing, again, of a neuron would look like. So here are your dendrites coming off of that cell body. So the impulse would be coming in through the dendrites. This entire thing here is your axon. Okay, and the impulse would go down the axon and then end at the axon terminals. And you can see there's a few other interesting structures that are on here. These are myelin sheaths. They're made up out of things called Schwann cells. And in between them, there's these little spaces on the axon. What this does is it actually allows the nerve impulse to jump and move very quickly down the neuron. So instead of the impulse needing to travel through every single section of the membrane, it can jump from one part to the next, and that makes it move much, much faster. Okay, so the myelin sheath is insulating the surrounding axon. Okay, so that's these little bubbles that you see. And then the nodes in between are called the nodes of Ranvier, and these are the gaps in the insulation. And again, that's going to allow this hopping type of thing to happen with the impulses as they're sent down, and it will move much faster. It's faster to actually jump to a point than it is to walk there. You're covering more space with a hop than you are by walking in a faster amount of time. So that's what the myelin sheaths will do for us. All right, so again, the neuron is the main cell of the nervous system, and all neurons have to have the ability to do three things. One, they must be able to receive a signal. Okay, this can be any kind of stimulus, could be from the environment, could be from another cell, could be from another neuron, but they have to be able to receive signals. And remember that receiving of a signal happens through the dendrites, is what's going to do the receiving of the signal. They also have to be able to transmit a signal to another location. Okay, so if your finger touches something, you need to be able to send a signal up to your spinal cord or brain so that you can interpret what it is that you're touching. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it slimy? That way you can know. So you send or transmit stuff. So you receive and then you transmit. And then neurons also have the ability to stimulate another cell. So they can tell another cell to do something. Sometimes it can be another neuron, and that would be just transmitting the signal from one cell to the other. That would be passing on the impulse. You could stimulate a muscle to contract, or a neuron could stimulate one of the glands in your body to secrete a hormone or sweat or something like that. So depending on what needs to happen, neurons have the ability to be able to stimulate other cells. Okay, so neurons are able to do all of these different things, and that is because of the structure with the dendrites and the axons and the way that they are put together allows them to do these three main functions. Okay, now a couple other special characteristics about the neuron. Longevity. Neurons can live and function for a lifetime. Okay, so your neurons are designed to live for your entire life. Some of them will die or expire before the end of your life. That's what happens a lot of times with elderly people as they start to lose their memory and things. Some of their neurons are starting to go away. You also can kill neurons through drug and alcohol use or brain damage and things like that, but they're designed to live for your entire lifetime. They do not divide, so you're actually born with the neurons that you're going to have. So all the neurons you have, you are born with. Your neurons develop when you are a fetus, when you're just a developing baby, and during that time they lose their ability to undergo mitosis, so they're no longer able to divide at that point, so they cannot divide. So if you lose some, they're gone, you can't replace them. And they have a very high metabolic rate. This means that they require a lot of energy in order to survive. So they need a lot of oxygen and they need a lot of glucose so they can get a whole lot of ATP, that's our energy molecule, and that ATP is what's going to keep everything running for us. So without a constant supply of oxygen and glucose, you won't have enough ATP and your neurons will not work. So that's a really important part about a neuron. All right, so when we talk about neurons, we actually can classify them in two different ways. The most common way of classifying neurons is functionally. So we will classify them as either sensory, motor, or interneurons, and we're going to spend a little more time talking about that type of classification. The second way to classify neurons is structural. And the main structural types are bipolar, unipolar, and multipolar. And basically that has to do with how many axons or processes are coming off of the cell body. So if you look at the bipolar, there's two main processes coming off of that cell body. In a unipolar, there's only one, and then it branches from there, but there's only one process that comes off. And a multipolar is the most common. These are the ones that we've been looking at so far. We've got lots of processes in all different places coming off of the cell body. So that's a multipolar. A primordial cell, is one that is kind of scattered all over the place. It doesn't really have much of a defined shape, and sometimes they can kind of change into what they need to be. All right, so we're going to focus on the functional classification. That is what you're going to hear most often when talking about neurons. So we are going to be functionally classifying them, which means we're going to classify them based on the direction that they send an impulse. So your sensory or afferent neurons, either way is correct. These are going to be carrying impulses from your skin or your internal organs or other sense organs to the CNS, and the CNS stands for your central nervous system. So your central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. Okay, so these guys are going to be taking information basically from the outside world and bringing it into your brain so your brain can interpret it. Your motor neurons, also called your efferent neurons, are going to carry impulses from your central nervous system to either your internal organs, telling them to do something, or to muscles or glands, telling them to contract or to secrete. So motor neurons are going to be telling your body to do something. And if you kind of think about motor makes me think of action. Like you have a motor in a car and it makes it go. So that makes me think of things are going to go, so a motor neuron's going to make things happen. In between your sensory and motor neurons, you have things called association or interneurons. These connect your motor and sensory neurons together, and these are going to be found only in the brain and spinal cord. So they're kind of like the go-between. So, if you think back to middle school, if you had a crush on somebody but you were afraid to talk to them, so you told your friend to talk to them for you, that friend in the middle is the interneuron. They're kind of like the go-between. So they're going to allow the sensory and motor neurons to communicate with each other by an indirect means through them. All right, so this is what this might look like. So here, this blue one is one of our sensory neurons, and that's going to take information in. So you can see the arrow is going to be going up. In the spinal cord here, we have an interneuron, so it's connecting the sensory down to the motor neuron, which is the red neuron, and that is going to send our information out to whatever our effectors are. It could be muscles, glands, whatever. And that pathway always goes in this way. Neurons do not send things the opposite direction. They only can send them in one direction. So that's an important distinction. All right, so the way your body actually works is the neuron is the main cell, but neurons don't typically work by themselves. They work in groups. So you might have a group of neurons that make up your peripheral nervous system. That is all of the nerves that extend off of your brain and spinal cord. That makes up your peripheral nervous system. And those are bundled into things called nerves. So these are groups of neurons, and they're going to kind of snake out all throughout your entire body. And they are classified in the same way as the neurons were. So you have sensory nerves. Okay, sensory nerves are going to contain sensory neurons, and so they're going to do the same thing. They're going to conduct impulses to the brain and spinal cord. Motor nerves are going to contain motor neurons, and they're going to carry impulses out to the muscles and glands. So again, the difference between a nerves and a neuron is that a nerve is a group of neurons that are all connected to each other. And then you might have some mixed nerves. You actually can have nerves that contain both sensory and motor neurons within them. So they can send information both ways. So they have the ability to go back and forth within the same nerve. And some of our really faster reflexes might be a mixed nerve. Instead of just going in one direction, they can allow it to go back and forth when you need to have a really fast reflex. So a lot of these nerves are going to come up when we talk about different nerve pathways. And the main nerve pathway that we're going to be talking about is the reflex arc. Reflex behavior is an automatic subconscious response to a stimulus. So if you are walking along and you step on a piece of glass, you are going to respond to that in a very distinct way. And it's actually a 5-step process in the way that we respond to things using the reflex arc. First of all, there has to be a sensory receptor is going to be stimulated. This is usually by one of your 5 senses, so pain, hearing, touch, smell, something like that is going to be stimulated. The information is going to get sent down the sensory nerve to the central nervous system, usually the spinal cord when we're talking about the reflex arc. So you stepped on the piece of glass, you send a pain signal up to your spinal cord. The interneurons in the spinal cord are going to receive that information and decide, what am I supposed to do about this? I'm feeling pain at the bottom of my foot. They're going to tell a certain motor nerve to transmit the signal to the muscle in your leg and tell you to lift your foot up. And that's the proper motor effect. Okay, so you have your sensory is stimulated, sends down a sensory nerve into the spinal cord. Here's your interneuron in there, and it's going to automatically send that information out to the effector organ, which would be the muscles in your leg, and you will pull your leg back. This is designed to protect you, so that if you start to feel pain, you pull your foot back before you step all the way down on the thing that's giving you the painful stimulus, and it should protect you from injury. And this happens in a fraction of a second. So it's a very, very fast response to protect you from a lot of the different stimuli that are out there. Another really common reflex that we have is the knee-jerk reflex. This helps you to maintain uprightness. So the reason that you can stand is because of your knee-jerk reflex. So you've ever gone to the doctor where they hit you with a hammer on the knee and they're checking your reflex? Again, when they hit that, they're hitting a bundle of sensory neurons that are going to send information up to the spinal cord. The interneuron is going to communicate to the appropriate motor neuron, and it's going to make those muscles contract, and that's what makes your legs straighten. That little bundle of neurons is being stimulated all the time whenever you're standing up, and that's what keeps this muscle contracted enough that you do not just fall down. You're able to stand upright. All right, and finally, sometimes we can get groups of neurons working together, and they can make hundreds of synaptic connections all together, and that allows you to learn how to perform common functions. So things like tying your shoes and writing, you had to learn how to do those things, and you develop neuronal pools for those. So this usually happens in the brain, and you will have this kind of section of your brain that is designated for tying your shoes, and all of these neurons came together as you learned how to tie your shoes, and then it becomes an automatic process over time. So that's how neuronal pools work.